On June 12, 1990, the First Congress of People's Deputies of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic adopted the Declaration of State Sovereignty, proclaiming the supremacy of its legislative acts over those of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. This document became one of the important steps on Russia's path to leaving the Soviet Union. In 1992, President Boris Yeltsin established a holiday on this day called the Day of Adoption of the Declaration of State Sovereignty of Russia. For many citizens of the Russian Federation, it was perceived as Independence Day, by analogy with other countries that gained sovereignty after the collapse of the Union. However, in 1997, Yeltsin proposed to rename the holiday to Russia Day. The political motivation behind this decision was obvious. By that time, a trend had formed in the Kremlin and the State Duma to reformat the state ideology. Instead of focusing on breaking with the past and separating from the Soviet Union, the authorities sought to emphasize continuity and the unbreakable connection with the centuries-old history of the empire.
We are inseparable from our homeland, from its centuries-old history and spiritual roots. And this unbreakable connection between times and events, the continuity of generations, is our priceless heritage. Relying on the experience of the past, we see the horizons of the future more clearly, set ourselves the most ambitious goals, and know that we will definitely accomplish all the tasks before us. The guarantee of this is our shared faith in Russia.
You know, simply put, if we look for the beginning of the ideological foundation of modern Putin's Russia, then perhaps those events are an excellent time marker that allows us to say that from that moment the Russian Federation took the wrong turn. In 1998, Boris Yeltsin appointed Vladimir Putin as director of the Federal Security Service, and a year later, Putin became acting president of the Russian Federation. But, you know, it's always good to do a little retrospective to understand, could the largest country on the planet have taken a different path? What prospects would have opened up for Russia if Yeltsin had chosen not Putin, but say Boris Nemtsov as his successor? And there was a chance for that. And this, I warn you right away, is an abstract conversation that I started while the main video is being edited. It's a look at the current situation of the Russian Federation through the prism of those very geopolitical goals that the current head of the Kremlin supposedly sets for himself. Could they have been achieved not through intimidating neighbors and war, but through soft power and democratization of the post-Soviet space?
For example, I believe that Putin carried out a creeping counter-revolution. He rolled back all the civil liberties that existed in our country. He is a counter-revolutionary. He is a reactionary. If we speak in, well, Marxist terms, again, he is certainly a reactionary. For him, his main idol is Alexander III. You know that, right?
Yes, Boris Nemtsov understood very clearly that Vladimir Putin is a counter-revolutionary, a person who, through his actions, tries to return to the past. We have heard many times from the Russian dictator that his goal is to revise the world order that was established after the Cold War. He kept insisting to everyone that his main goal was to put an end to the unipolar world. But the Petersburg thug didn't realize that if a unipolar world ever existed, it was only for a very short period of time. After the collapse of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, countries emerged globally that could potentially become regional leaders. China was rapidly turning into an economic giant. The Middle East, thanks to its large hydrocarbon reserves, was becoming a region capable of dictating its own terms to the Western world. This isn't mentioned often, but generally, Operation Desert Storm in 1991 was mainly lobbied for by Saudi Arabia and the monarchs of Kuwait, who paid for most of the costs of the operation. So, if a unipolar world did exist for some period of time, it wasn't for very long. So all of Putin's attempts to build a new multipolar world are just a made-up excuse to justify aggression. After all, it has existed for a long time. Putin, on the other hand, as Boris Nemtsov said, is trying to carry out a counter-revolution both in his own country and on the geopolitical stage. He is trying to bring back the era of Cold Wars, where there are only a few centers of power that decide the fate of our blue planet.
Now, regarding the prospects. Friends, our prospects are very simple. Either we manage to dismantle the Putin regime and return the country to popular rule, democracy, and citizens' rights, or there will be no Russia. The entire prospect will crumble, leading to wars, killings, and other conflicts.
I understand that currently Russian troops are gradually advancing on Ukrainian territory. Talks about the collapse of Russia, which was so common in 2022, now seem absurd. But that's only if our perspective is focused on the front line which runs through several regions of Ukraine. But if you analyze the overall picture, you'll realize that the prophetic warning of Boris Nemtsov, spoken 13 years ago, could come true in its entirety. At the very least, he was right that there would be wars. But think about it. What could Russia gain as a result of this war? What will the Russian state get in the most positive scenario for itself? Let's assume that in the coming years, the Russian armed forces continue their gradual occupation and, after fierce fighting, fully occupy the war-torn Donbas region. Will this be a victory of Russia over Ukraine? No, Russia will not get its frozen assets back. Will the destroyed Donbas and parts of other regions become a heavy burden on the Russian budget? Yes. As a result of a prolonged slaughter, Russia will become a state economically dependent on China, posing a direct threat to the Russian Federation. This is reported by the Federal Security Service. You saw their leaked report, where Russian intelligence agencies directly say that the Celestial Empire may soon make territorial claims on Russian lands. I will definitely make a video about this. But the main thing is that Vladimir Putin's personalist regime is limited by his biological clock. It's clear that many people believe that another Russian dictator will quickly replace the current one, but I won't get tired of repeating Putin's image as the father of the nation has been built up for 20 years. The Russian people literally see him as a messiah. After his death, whoever comes to replace him will not have the same political weight. And the conflict between the financial elites, along with a not-so-simple economic situation, could expose all the contradictions that are currently being contained by a supposed unity against a common enemy.
What factors lead to collapse?
There are several. The first is the threat of the country's financial bankruptcy.
The critical issue is the declining population. With such expansive territories, it is neither feasible nor appropriate for a single individual to govern Russia.
The third factor is Islam, which we've already talked about today. This means tension, xenophobia, and interethnic conflicts. These are the three factors.
The fourth factor is precedent, such as South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Now that they've been recognized, it sets a precedent for Chechnya, Dagestan, Yakutia, Tatarstan, and everyone else.
They'll say, gentlemen, you recognize them, they're just like us, so how are they really different from us?
I've said many times that Russia has already lost this war. However, unfortunately, Ukraine hasn't won it yet. Of course, like many others, I'm primarily concerned about people's fate, not the ephemeral geopolitical weight of the Russian Federation. But as I said earlier, for this video on a free topic, I'm deliberately taking a different perspective. After all, today is Russia Day, and maybe sometimes it's necessary to show Putin's electorate, who are so concerned about their state's hegemony, a different point of view. The true result of 3 years of the so-called special military operation. Kazakhstan is signing a military cooperation agreement with the United Kingdom and building a plant on its territory to produce 155mm shells. Azerbaijan, despite aiming for neutrality, provides humanitarian aid to Ukraine and shuts down Russian state institutions' offices, adhering to NATO standards. Uzbekistan seeks European sponsors. Once neutral Finland and Sweden, although very cautiously, are beginning to oppose Russia in the Baltic Sea. The loss of Syria, disagreements in Mali, and now problems are looming in Libya. And by the way, these are not just my conclusions. I practically quoted to you a post by the Russian political consultant, a person who was supposed to play an important role in establishing a pro-Russian regime in Ukraine, Igor Dmitriev. He was included in the list of the political landing group heading to Kyiv in February 2022 for this purpose. In his Telegram post, he summarized the aforementioned results of the special military operation. But objectively, everything could have turned out differently.
He is creating the most inefficient, corrupt, monopolized, and anti-people version of capitalism that steals from the people. That is capitalism based on monopolies and the absolute power of bureaucracy.
This is the worst form of capitalism imaginable, causing immense suffering to the entire population.
Instead of creating competition, supporting small and medium-sized businesses, lowering taxes, and developing high technology, they are building the most backward and primitive raw material-based model.
I've always wanted to ask one question to Russians who support the war in Ukraine. Over these 3 years, we've seen that the Russian economic bloc and the representatives of the so-called liberal school of economics sitting in it have dealt with the challenges of the war most effectively. This is a widely known fact. All Western specialized sources acknowledge that Nabulina and her team not only managed to save Russia from economic collapse, but also ensured macro and micro financial stability. And so the question arises, couldn't all the goals that Putin sets for himself, like preserving Russia's sphere of influence and gaining the status of a world power, have been achieved by the same means used by other countries? After all, the absence of corruption, a high-tech sector, and an open economy, aren't these the main components for a country's dominance in the modern world? Objectively speaking, after the collapse of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Russia retained its status as a nuclear power and kept large enterprises for processing hydrocarbons. Russia preserved its scientific potential, by the way, not without the help of the much-hated George Soros, who paid grants to Russian scientists within the Russian Federation so they could continue their work. I've already discussed this. Basically, all Moscow needed to do after the 90s was to reform the courts and ensure the inviolability of private property. Invest in infrastructure to become a link between China and Europe, and invest the proceeds from hydrocarbon sales into science. That's what Boris Nemtsov was proposing to do. Wouldn't these simple actions have allowed the Russian Federation to become not just a regional power on which not only the entire former Commonwealth of Independent States depends, but also Europe and China? Instead, these Z-branded scum see the greatness of the country in leaving a Ukrainian grandmother without electricity. Could these moral degenerates have been re-educated if Nemtsov had become Yeltsin's successor in 1999? Personally, I don't know, but I'm sure that was the last chance for the biggest country.
Here's a quote from UAZ, an authoritarian dictatorial regime of the Asian type where most of the property, power, assets, and money are in the hands of a small group is unacceptable in Russia. The current regime is neither Asian-style authoritarian nor dictatorial.
It is quickly shifting towards the Asian model of authoritarianism and dictatorship.
The last name doesn't matter. I can name you generals or current governors or current mayors who could fully play the role of a dictator. I can say that if within these years, literally just a few years, normal and clear rules are not established.
If property continues to go for next to nothing to insiders, if budget money keeps circulating through insider banks,
if municipal and regional property continues to be squandered like this, then, of course, what you just quoted will definitely happen to us.
No matter how you look at it, in the modern world, one of the main components of a great power is its scientific potential. In general, there is a theory that every new system of international relations is the result not only of past wars but also of scientific progress. The Westphalian system resulted from rationalized thinking, the Vienna system from the Industrial Revolution, and the Yalta-Potsdam system from the emergence of nuclear energy and weapons. Therefore, in order to revise the system of international relations, it is necessary not only to start a war and win it, but also to make a transition to a new stage of scientific development. Now, I believe that such a stage could be artificial intelligence. But has Putin taken care of this important component? Well, judge for yourself. The Russian Interfax reports the words of the Vice President of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Valentin Paramon. I quote, "Russia has lost 50,000 scientists over the past 5 years." For context, this quote is from the year 2023. Did the trend continue in 2024? Well, that's a rhetorical question. Thanks to Putin's policies, which led to sanctions, the space industry of the Russian Federation was practically destroyed. If just about 10 years ago Roscosmos was in first place in terms of the number of space launches, then in 2024 New Zealand of all places started catching up to it. Well, as of now, if we count the still ongoing year 2025, New Zealand's rocket lab is currently ahead of Russia in the number of launches. That's how it is. And so, on Russia Day, I want to ask Putin's electorate, is this really the greatness you were striving for?
We are a rocket and space power. Yes, and that's how it has historically turned out. However, it could have been sustained at a fundamental level, including via commercial proton launches.
When the United States altered the shuttle system, they lacked the means to launch satellites. They needed to launch them to capture that market.
None of this was done. Everyone lost.
Now rockets are falling. Is that normal?
I fully understand that in this video I voiced some pretty obvious thoughts, but I feel like I just had to say them out loud. Especially on a day like this, Russia Day, it's not that I regret how things turned out. Maybe it's just the natural course of history. It hurts and is bitter only for those who died trying to stop Putin and his electorate, to stop them both inside Russia and on the Ukrainian front. After 1990, Russia had colossal opportunities, unlimited reserves of natural resources and nuclear weapons that allowed it not to worry about security. Russia had a powerful cultural influence in the post-Soviet space as well as a scientific and industrial base. This country had a fairly large and educated population. It would seem that this country simply had no chance of becoming a failed state. As they say, just take it and develop. Instead, the ideology of the young country was based on primitive revanchism for past failures and hatred towards everyone around it. Boris Nemtsov shot dead on Putin's orders on February 27 on the Moskvoretsky Bridge. He was not just a great politician, not just a wise man capable of foreseeing the fate of his country, not just a person about whom Nobel laureate Vitaly Ginzburg spoke. He was truly a talented physicist. Above all, Boris Nemtsov was simply a sincere, forgiving and kind person. I'm sure that if he had become president in 1999, there would have been no repressions, no political murders, and of course no war. But knowing how many people in his homeland now consider him a traitor, I have to state, most Russian citizens simply did not deserve to have someone like Nemtsov as their president.
Was anyone oppressing Russians in Crimea? Russians have always been in power there. Or was anyone bothering them in Donetsk?
Power is all that matters to him at any cost. If a victorious war with his Ukrainian brothers is what it takes, he will pursue it. Because the goal is not to ensure order and prosperity in Donbass. That's complete nonsense, absolutely.
And the goal is to hold on to power.
He could have held on to it if he had been building roads in our country, if our healthcare system was improving, if we didn't have an African level of mortality. In my home region now, Yaroslavl, where I'm a deputy, people are dying from cancer. Do you know why? Because there are no medicines, no painkillers, and people end their lives by suicide because there is no money in the budget. And this scoundrel, instead of taking care of Russia and solving our problems, decided to lecture you.
That's what infuriates me, you know? I mean, if we were America, a prosperous country.
And here we are, bringing something bright, great, and useful to the Ukrainian people. What bright and great thing are we bringing? Are we bringing that bastard, Dmitry Kiselev the Bright? Or selling oil and gas all over the world and stuffing our own pockets because of it?